Never mind. I'm sure if there is anybody there, I shall. Okay. Right. Well, welcome. Thank you for coming to this. I don't know, X+1 seminar in the HAVE series this year. Today we're kind of greatly privileged to have our colleague, whom I'm sure many of you know, if not all of you, Sarah Spate. Sarah is currently kicking her heels on study leave.
I know. Bored witness.
Yeah, but we got her in. She's been generous enough to come in for this afternoon. She is, of course, well, she's many things. She's an archaeologist by training, and so that she has an interesting part to her life. She's also the deputy head of the School of Education, but she is also, on top of that, something very big and important in leading the university's employability scheme of some kind. It has some very clever name.
The Nottingham Advantage Award,
The Nottingham
John.
Advantage Award. Thank you. The Nottingham Advantage Award. Anyway, it's terribly important, and she's also done some research in this kind of territory, which she's now going to tell us all about. Sarah.
Thank you. And Natasha's here with me, who's the kind of the main person actually who did the bulk of the data collection for our research that we're going to talk about. So it's very much Natasha and my project. Before I get going, I'll just say that one of our findings was that there was a disconnect between academic understanding and valuation of employability and what the literature says. I think Professor Holford has just demonstrated that with his lack of knowledge of the Nottingham Advantage Award. So
I stand reprimanded.
So thank you, John. I'm not very good at sitting down. I'll hover around a bit if you don't mind. Okay, so I'll talk for a bit. By all means, please interrupt me as I go along. Similarly, Natasha, if you want to chip in and add things, please do. Okay, so last year, Natasha, myself and Lucy Cooker, who's another colleague that some of you in the room may know, Lucy's just recently completed her PhD, we decided that we were interested in exploring what the literature says about employability in higher education and its relationship to academic curriculum, but also particularly how the kind of literature on employability relates to what universities say in their mission statements. And was there a disconnect between grand institutional strategies and very bold statements about the purpose of programmes in higher education and what stakeholders actually thought about employability in practice? And by stakeholders, we meant students, we meant staff, both academic and administrative, and we also meant employers. So there were various questions that we were interested in. Now, the reason why we were interested in these things is that, as John's alluded, back in 2008, sorry, I'll stop. Back in 2008, the University of Nottingham launched what we might call an extracurricular employability award, the Nottingham Advantage Award. Many universities in the UK and indeed internationally now have these programmes. They're designed to provide, you might say, value-added education, training. They're very often skills focused, primarily for undergraduates, but also increasingly for postgraduates, to make sure that students can add something onto their disciplinary degree, that they might exit their university with their degree plus. So Nottingham started back in 2008. It had a slow build, but it's now extremely successful, managed by Vicky Mann, who's based over in the careers team in the Portland building, and it's growing like mad. Okay, so say back in 2008 there were a couple of modules. It then got up to half a dozen, a couple of hundred students. In this year we're up to 2,000 students in the UK. We're also now running this programme on the Malaysia campus and on the China campus, where there's about another 300-400 students. So it's become quite a big programme. When it started, it was very much about finding some way to package or to credit activities that students were already engaged in. So finding some way of giving students some form of concrete evidence that the university recognised that this activity or that activity was actually adding to their overall portfolio of skills or capabilities. Subsequently, the university has thought more about the kind of strategic direction of the award. It appointed an academic director in 2010, that's me, and it has increased staffing, and we're now at the point where we have to think about the future direction of the award because it's getting so big. Well, obviously it's still only 2,000 students. I can't off the top of my head say many thousands of students there are in the University of Nottingham community, but the point is that the award is open to everyone, so potentially now every student in the university, undergraduate, postgraduate taught, and also at some point postgraduate research, can access its modules. So it has to be sustainable. It also has to be strategically focused so it fits with the overall mission and the purpose of the university. So because of that programme, because the Advantage Award exists, we got to a point where there was a need to start doing some research to see, is it fit for purpose? What's the buy-in of Nottingham stakeholders? What direction should it be going in? And of course there are big questions that are also being raised at the moment due to the take-up. Again, both Natasha and I could sit down and we could remind ourselves, for example, if you look back through the history of this programme, what were the schools that were the early schools to take it up? Which schools have proved resistant? Which group of students tend to opt for the award? Okay, now if you look at that pie chart back from last autumn, you'll see overwhelmingly it is taken up by social science students. Now they won't be from education though, they'll be from business and they'll be from geography, won't they? And they'll be from economics. They'll be from those schools who were early adopters of the award and who very quickly put on bespoke modules for their own students. So within the School of Economics, it is compulsory for all undergraduates to take careers skills in economics, not as part of their degree, but as part of the Nottingham Advantage Award. Okay, so some schools went down a let's make employability training compulsory. Other schools have kind of been very hands-off. And that's something that was reflected in the research that we did. So what that pie chart also says to us is, if this programme is so useful and so beneficial to students, then do we have an issue in terms of access? You know, the students who are taking up the award, are they all, you might say, the high achieving proactive students, whereas you might say the students who actually need it most are the shy and retiring, the less academically able, those students who don't have either the initiative or the confidence to find the award and to enrol upon it. Okay, so there are all sorts of other issues in terms of the take-up of the award that we were interested in. We didn't particularly go out to explore those, but we were aware of those in the background of the thinking and the research that we were planning. Again, just thinking about where this fits in terms of the context. So if the award started back in 2008, it had its first review report to Management Board in the early part of 2010. And that really set out that the purpose of the award, there you can see its strapline, Achieve More, the Nottingham Advantage Award, that its purpose was to prepare students for professional life, lifelong learning, reflective practice, service for the public good, personal development, attitudes, skills to manage own growth. Okay, so there's a lot of buzz phrases in there that were set out in that report to Management Board as to the intentions of the award. And so that has kind of underpinned its development, but going forward, it's gone to the next level, I think. So again, back in 2008, when it was first developed, it had a very, very instrumental, focused list of skills. This is what the award is all about. It's about IT literacy, numeracy, oral and written communication, teamwork, etc. Okay, these were the general list of transferable skills that the University of Nottingham had within its good practice guide for the approval of new undergraduate courses. When Natasha, myself, other colleagues reviewed the content of the award in 2011, we could see that actually the portfolio of modules which was very much existed due to the interests of individuals who came forward with ideas, had expanded somewhat, and the award was now delivering sustainability literacy. It was delivering on internationalisation, cultural sensitivity, globalisation, corporate social responsibility. There were a whole series of bigger attributes or capabilities that had almost kind of crept into the award by the back door, because they reflected, as I've said, the enthusiasms, the passions, the interests of particular individuals who came forward. So a colleague in contemporary Chinese studies, for example, put together a fantastic module on global citizenship, which recruited something like 75 students drawn from 16 different schools across the university. And these weren't all Chinese students by any means. This was an international group of students who were working with the local Chinese community on individual projects, how to help the Chinese community make better use and access the NHS, for example. A whole series of really useful practical projects. That academic ended up then leading a module that was served much more than his own particular school, contemporary Chinese studies. It was serving the whole university community. And that in its turn started to raise issues of, well, how do we resource this programme? Now it's getting to this kind of scale. And should some of the stuff that we're doing inside the Nottingham Advantage Award actually form part of mainstream curriculum? Okay, so again, all sorts of interesting issues that were coming up and we were thinking about as we got stuck into a piece of research. Before I tell you actually about the research, let me just again give you the headlines. And so once Natasha had started crunching all the data, we ended up with you might say, a series of indicative quotations that showed the extent to which the stakeholders of the university expressed very, very polarised opinions and views on employability. So this is something we were really, really interested in, the differences in perspective. So this is just some of the startling differences. So you might have a group of people who would, for instance, say, look at that second bullet point, employability is different and separate from subject curriculum. So employability's got nothing to do with your discipline, i.e. it's something that someone else does. It's something that the careers service does. I'm a historian and archaeologist, nothing to do with me. I teach my history and my archaeology. On the other hand, you've got that last bullet point, employability means to develop people's potential in all sorts of areas so that they turn into people with a special quality of mind and personality. Okay, so we've got people saying employability is nothing to do with me, thank you very much. We've got other people recognising or understanding employability to be a much broader concept. Okay, so what came out of our research was some quite polarised opinions.
Was that last opinion, was that positive towards employability or negative?
I see that as positive towards employability. And if I remember rightly, Natasha, that last point was expressed most clearly by students as well. Or it was students who responded to that statement and understood it and accepted it.
Some tutors did as well, but just few tutors really.
So anyway, I'll come on to the methodology in a moment, but these kind of statements which emerged from our research showed us, for example, that that students might tend to think in one direction. Academics wouldn't always think in the same way. Employers, the small group of employers we talk to, would sometimes have more innovative and, you might say, creative interpretations of employability than actual university people. So there were some quite interesting findings. Okay, so again, once we started to get into the literature as well around employability, of course, what we were also exploring were the tensions that had already been picked up by a whole series of other studies that were looking at academic interpretations of employability, what employers value in terms of graduate attributes, what students think in terms of what they need to get out of their university education to then go on into their careers. And you can boil all those tensions down and say they revolve around what is the purpose of higher education. So, is it about the public good or positional good? Is it about the individual and their ability to profit from their education? Is it about contribution to society? Whose responsibility is employability? Is it us as individuals? Is it the whole institution? Is it the careers service? Is it the degree? And most importantly, what is the curriculum? Is the curriculum some fixed entity around a particular discipline, or actually is curriculum a journey? Is curriculum a learning space? Okay, so these, you might say, purpose, responsibility, curriculum, these were three particular areas of tension that were coming out of the employability literature. And if you put that into again a global context, because this is certainly not just a UK issue, and our research was able to also bring in our Nottingham's Ningbo campus, then employability obviously is hugely important, but the literature shows us that its definition, its understanding is getting broader and broader. And that, for instance, there's an increasing literature on learning for unemployment and learning for underemployment. Okay, we all read the papers or we look at the news. We're aware, for example, that youth unemployment is a major issue within certain countries within Western Europe. We're aware that the underemployment of graduates is of increasing concern in China and other Asian countries. Okay, so the literature of employability is also now about thinking of how what universities perhaps should be doing for their students is preparing them for lives of uncertainty. Okay, if I go to my third bullet point there, preparing students for unknown futures, preparing students for ages of super complexity, when we don't know what the job market is going to be like in 10, 20, 30 years. We don't know what the particular capabilities or skills are that may be required. And so why should we, for instance, create employability programs that have very, very fixed boundaries? Okay, one of the particular papers that I do like is the one I refer to in that third bullet point by Ronald Barnett, Learning for an Unknown Future, where he describes the skills agenda as basically going down a cul-de-sac. It's an agenda that doesn't take you anywhere because it's fixed, it's not creative, it doesn't allow for innovation. And that second point, sustainability. Sustainability is a huge buzzword within the literature for higher education. And so what is the purpose of a university education if not to prepare students for a contribution to a changing society, and a society that very much needs to think about how it turns itself into something that is sustainable? And the literature is also saying that at the moment higher education is producing graduates who are not sustainable in their values, they're not sustainable in their behaviours, they're very often going off into jobs in industries that are themselves not sustainable. Okay, so again, a whole series of very, very big real world issues that are underpinning the literature on employability. And part of this resolves around the tensions in the language, okay, the language of employability. Okay, a few years ago, or maybe it's 20 odd years ago now, it would have been learning for employment, learning for jobs. It's shifted. It's learning for employability, which implies more of a journey, more of a continuum. But even that, employability is so often couched within a kind of human capital discourse in terms of education as investment for a good career, which clearly, hopefully, will allow you to pay back your debt in a certain period of time. So we can completely understand why the language of employability is quite often kind of economic or financially focused. But how does that then match with mission statements of universities, which are much bolder and much more kind of life-affirming, for example, and talk about improving life for individuals and societies worldwide, developing future leaders, equipping students to be global citizens, to make contributions to their communities. So there's a disconnect in the language. On the one hand, the University of Nottingham and other global universities see themselves as making a contribution. On the other hand, they also want to send out graduates into top jobs, top salaries. I'm not saying that's necessarily bad, of course, but there's a disconnect in the language. And I'm sure most of you in the room will be fairly expert on kind of human capital theory. Here's a quote from our recently departed colleague, Professor Melanie Walker, from one of her recent publications, where she says that human capital is an impoverished normative model for education because it does not prioritise well-being or an expansive human agency, nor is it underpinned by a transformative notion of development. And now, many people out there in the literature are making comments along this, like you might say most universities' mission statements would agree with that, but in practice, in terms of their outputs, I think most universities are still stuck in more of a human capital paradigm. And that's certainly the feeling that we got when we got onto our research. Okay, just going to bung up 3 definitions of employability from different sources. If anyone would like to make any comments on those or critique them, say whether or not you would support them or if there's anything you'd like to challenge. Okay, so from 1998, Hillard and Pollard, employability is about being capable of getting and keeping fulfilling work. It's a capability to move self-sufficiently within the labour market, to realise potential through sustainable employment. Any comments? Do you like it? Do you not like it?
Yes. Well, it rather presumes that there are jobs to get.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it makes an assumption that graduates are going to be able to move into employment.
Well, it's something for DFES and it looks like it.
Okay, yes. And there's also a focus there on the individual. It's about, and it's, dare I say it, and I don't want to be naive here, but it's a selfish definition.
It's also a guilt-ridden definition.
Yes.
If you don't get employment,
Yeah.
it's your bloody fault, isn't
Yes.
it?
Yes, you are a failure if you don't get employment. The Higher Education Academy, 2006, employability is a set of skills, understandings, personal attributes that make graduates more likely to gain employment and be successful in their chosen occupations. Any thoughts? Well, it's got understandings in there, but it's still, it's again, be successful in chosen occupations. Again, we've also got to a point where it's the sustainability of the occupations. It is also significant in terms of contribution to society, perhaps, rather than the economy. So I see that one still being quite economically focused.
It also generates the notion of chosen occupation. Puts us into a choice framework.
Yes, yeah, and actually, how much choice is there?
Yeah, I think that needs to be. I don't regard myself as ever having chosen an occupation. You kind of end up in it, don't you?
Drifted into being a professor of higher education.
Adult.
Sorry. Dacre, Poole and Sewell, 2007. Employability is having a set of skills, knowledge, understanding, personal attributes that make a person more likely to choose and secure occupations in which they can be satisfied and successful.
Just a fluffy version of the
Yeah,
other.
it is, isn't it?
Just a
All those assumptions that we can choose, that we can secure.
Yeah.
That again, you know, I can make these decisions in which I can be satisfied and successful. And there's still that sense that success is measured in terms of your salary.
Your Foucauldians would look at this in another way, wouldn't it? And they'd say, we're shaping people. These are all about shaping people to want these particular outcomes.
Yes. And being employed makes them feel secure. So it's almost like manipulating with this word security.
But
and
it's-
then why?
But it's fixed, isn't it, in the normative understanding of employability, in the standard framework that's existed for the last 100, 150 years in industrialised societies. It's not capable of looking around the edges. Okay, so a whole series of tensions that we're unpicking already. And if you kind of bring some of them back down to what do those tensions mean at university level, then it's how is employability taught once we've decided what it is? To what extent is employability about adding on something? Should it be embedded? Should it be integrated? Now, we've got some wonderful quotes from our research. On the one hand, you know, you've got a couple of academics who'll say we can think about what we do in our disciplines. If we teach we're using creative pedagogies, then we are teaching at the same time for employability. But we had one quote from one academic who basically said, well, we hide it within the curriculum. We don't want to tell anyone that we're teaching them employability. We just kind of, we're not going to make it obvious because that will put people off. They'll think that we're detracting from the value of their subject discipline. Is employability a panacea for other big issues in higher education? Okay, do we worry, do we think, are we spending so much time thinking about the employability of the graduates that we've got that we actually spend less time thinking about all the screening mechanisms that have already gone on to give us our group of graduates, and those screening mechanisms that may also have an impact upon the jobs that those graduates get, i.e. if they come out with a first or a 2-2, if they come out from a discipline rather than another, a institution rather than another, their ethnicity, their gender, a whole series of other issues. So some commentators would suggest that we forget about all of that and we assume in the debates and the literature on employability that we're dealing with a level playing field of students. And it's a homogenous group of students that we're trying to turn into employable beings. I think there's a huge tension about preparing individuals for individualised careers and preparing students to be members of communities. That's very evident there, I think, in the strategies and the policies. And I personally have a real problem with leadership. And that may be that I need to read more about leadership, but I really dislike the word leadership and the idea that the University of Nottingham is churning out future leaders. I'd like to unpick a bit more about what that actually means.
The only people who believe in leadership are vice chancellors.
Okay, so employability is a big field out there in the literature. You can do a literature review, but you can never ever read everything that is available. Can you, Natasha? It just goes on and on and on.
It goes on.
The graduate attributes is very much a related field, but also has a slightly distinctive literature. Now, here is this is fairly old, this comes from 2000, but here is another kind of definition, this time of graduate attributes, which is, I think, trying to occupy a kind of middle ground of what I might call soft human capital. Now, Melanie Walker would say to me, soft human capital doesn't exist. It's either human capital or it's not. But it seems to me that there are kind of articulations of human capital out there that are trying to express human capital in terms of well-being and various other things. So this is what Bowden, Hart, King and Trigwell, etc. say in 2000. Graduate attributes are the qualities, skills and understandings a university community agrees its students should develop during their time with the institution. These attributes include but go beyond the disciplinary expertise or technical knowledge that has traditionally formed the core of most university courses. They are qualities that also prepare graduates as agents for social good in an unknown future. Right, so I like that last sentence. There's various bits of that I like. I think the italics are all yours, Natasha, when you are critiquing that particular quotation. But there's a threat in there, isn't there? There's a huge threat in there to the academic community, and that is that these attributes include but go beyond the disciplinary expertise or technical knowledge that traditionally forms the core of most university degree courses. And that threat certainly came out in the research that we conducted.
Can I just raise a thought there? Because if you go back to Newman's book on the idea of a university, and in quite a lot of contributions subsequently, they are very concerned with universities as being about the development of character, things of that sort. You get that a lot in 19th century education, don't you? So how does that, and in a sense, they would have seen, I suppose academics at that point would have said, if you're going along to Oxford or Cambridge in around about the turn of the 19th century, 19th, 20th centuries, people would have said, well, we're not coming here to teach you law or economics or whatever. We're just to make you a good chap in society, able to
be a gentleman.
Sorry?
Be a gentleman.
Be a gentleman, exactly. And so that's a lot about qualities and skills and so on, not about content, isn't it? And in a sense, the content, the technical knowledge stuff, is actually, to some extent, relatively recent, I suspect. I mean, not that they didn't concern themselves at all with teaching philosophy or whatever, but that was going to sort of, that was a lesson thing. And in fact, Newman says very explicitly somewhere that, you know, if he could choose between somewhere which taught very well to get people to pass exams, and somewhere which did no teaching at all but just left people in residence for 3 years, doing whatever they wanted, he'd choose the second, not the first. It's more like a university.
No, yeah, I would agree that you're right, that most of the disciplines are fairly recent, aren't they? Certainly in Western universities. And you know, you and I have other interests in where some of these disciplines come from adult education, etc. And you might perhaps, in a sense, Newman's come back round into fashion, because yes, the character of the individual, the character of the person, is very much in vogue now within the literature and within the raison d'etre of various universities with their new models of curriculum.
But in a different way from Newman. It's much more back to a deserving and undeserving poor kind of debate of, you know, if you're employable, it's because you're failing, as John was saying earlier. So it's your moral failing to be unemployed. You know, so it's rather Newman's kind of focus on a positive building of character. This is more, you know, negative. You're failed. You're not employed.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, certainly the literature again recognises that kind of moral imperative around employment is still there. Okay, let's come on to the actual project, and I'll whiz through a series of slides here. So last, I don't know when it was now, in the autumn of 2010, early 2011, we put in a bid to the university's Teaching and Learning Strategic Fund to undertake a piece of research exploring Nottingham University staff, student, employer attitudes towards employability. And what we wanted to do was to find out what people thought about employability, how they thought it related to the academic curriculum, what they thought about the Nottingham Advantage Award, did they think that it was fit for purpose, what did they think that the role of academics was in terms of employability, and what kind of steer would they give to the Nottingham Advantage Award as it grew over the next few years. So we got that funding, and we obviously designed our project, and by its end, it ended up being in 3 phases. The bulk of the work is a 2-phase project that involves interviews with 4 schools in 4 different faculties across the UK campus. So with history, mechanical, material and manufacturing engineering, mathematical sciences, sociology and social policy. So we went and we did interviews with those 4 schools. Subsequently, we had the opportunity to extend our research to the Ningbo campus. So we took that and we were able to do another 23 interviews. Okay, so there's just the detail there of the people that we spoke to. You can see we managed to talk to 7 employers who had various connections with UK schools. We didn't manage to get to employers in China, but we did manage to get a fairly representative group of staff and students. So it's quite a big piece of work, I would say, in the end, Natasha. You know, we managed to conduct 74 interviews, and a few of those involved focus groups as well.
Were these employers that had connections with the university?
Yes, wherever possible. These were employers who we were alerted to, we were led to by the schools.
Yes, but they did not necessarily know about the Advantage Award.
So phase 1 was interviews with 2 of the schools, with history and with engineering. And in phase 2, we applied Q methodology. Would you like to briefly say what Q methodology is, Natasha, being an expert?
Oh, that's too kind to say that I'm an expert. But okay, so Q method is a specific method used to investigate participants' attitudes and beliefs. And basically, we would come up with a set of statements, and we would create a bank of statements. So we created a bank of 38 statements about employability, and that was in phase 2. And we actually built our statements on the interviews in phase 1. So that was basically, that's how you create Q methodology. You usually use interviews, and then you use the interview data to create statements about what was expressed in those interviews in phase 1. So that's what we did, and then there is a particular grade, like an opinion grade, and then we would ask participants to first of all tell us whether they agree, disagree, or not sure about the statement. So they would then rank them on the opinion grid, ranging from most agree with to neutral, and then to most disagree with. And that's how you actually get to place all and rank all the statements, and that's very effective in order to see where they place certain statements. So it's very interesting to look at most agree and most disagree statements, and then you ask the participants why they most disagreed with or why they most agreed with certain statements.
And the good thing about that was, so we did interviews with history and engineering, created the statements, and then we went to maths and sociology and social policy and got those people to reflect on the statements from history and engineering.
Exactly. So the statements, we created statements based on the interviews we had with engineering and with history, and then we did Q methodology with with sociology and with maths. Yeah, that's right.
So that again, it's quite an interesting methodology, which will be obviously you could have a whole seminar on that. So we'll just have to gloss over it, I think, for now. And then phase 3, we just went back and did more phase 1 interviews in China. Okay, so Natasha's spoken about that now. So what we ended up with at the end of the Q methodology then, which is focused on the data we collected on the Nottingham campus, was a kind of, we could rank order then the statements and people's responses to them, and we could come out with those statements that had the highest impact in terms of the greatest number of people agreeing.
Yes.
So you get high impact agree, high impact disagree, down to high controversy, low controversy, and the most interesting statements, which we judged at the most interesting statements, the ones that had the combination of impact and controversy.
Yes, they had, for instance, high impact, but they also had high controversy. So they were very interesting because a lot of people agreed, say, but there are also, for instance, a lot of people say there is a statement and a lot of people agreed most with that statement, but there are 2 people so that most disagreed with the statement, so they are controversial therefore.
So it's quite
exactly.
Yeah, so we got some wonderful colour-coded spreadsheets, and obviously it gives us all the detail of all of this. Okay, now let's just give you a flavour of the findings then. So earlier I showed you some of the kind of headline controversial statements. These 2 were the least controversial. So employability and recruitability are the same or overlapping concepts. Basically, virtually no one was able to unpick that comment. Virtually no one that we spoke to could give us a distinction between employability and recruitability. Would anyone in the room like to?
Depends which model of employability you're using, but,
Yes.
but in that dominant model, yes, but in some of the other European models, I'd say there's a radical difference.
Well, okay,
I'd like to know.
go on then.
Well, a lot of employability theory, and particularly it's coming from France, I suppose, particularly, but within the EU, is saying, well, okay, there's all this individual stuff, that's fine, but actually you can't understand this outside society and political economy. And so, interactive employability that Gazier talks about. So there's different. You've got to get the labour market in there. You've got to get social reality. What's it mean to be living in Mansfield in a poor community which has had low take up of higher education, low take up of where the labour market's collapsed. What's it mean? Employability means something different than it does in Beeston.
And where's recruitability coming?
Well, I would see recruitability as, yes, very much like that, the Hillage and Pollard version.
Yeah, I'd say
of
recruitability is much more instrumental.
It's getting the
it's
job.
Having a good CV. It's
So that
selling
there's no
yourself
lifelong.
sufficiently
Yeah.
to get the job.
Yes, getting your foot at the door,
Yeah.
you know, to
Yeah.
have an interview. So that will be recruitability.
Yeah. So there's no lifelong perspective to it. It's you're just getting in the labour market.
So we had a view on what the difference between those concepts was, but it wasn't something that was we were able to get really from our
But we were, I think,
stakeholders.
really unpleasantly surprised with the second bullet, I think.
Yes. Yes, look, the least controversial statement, graduate employability is connected to the development of students as reflective practitioners and critical thinkers. Our responses were generally neutral.
Yeah, so people just didn't think anything about it. So which is really problematic, we thought.
Yeah.
I mean, almost everybody didn't know what to think about it.
So why was that a problem?
I mean, because if employability is not seen in that way as developing reflective thinking and critical thinking, then again it is seen separate from the curriculum. Because if you think that the curriculum does that, then an employability doesn't, or you're not sure, that means that you separate the two rather than seeing them as dependent on each other.
So if people are neutral about this, that means they're not against.
Doesn't
the
mean they
idea.
don't agree.
Yeah, yes.
It just means
So
they don't
it
have any
means-
strong
Yeah.
position on it.
Yeah, so we kind of defined least controversy in terms of people just couldn't make up their mind. So if
Yeah.
somebody's unable to make up their mind, they either don't know enough about it, so it's not necessarily that they disagreed, but they just simply didn't know enough
Yeah.
about it so they could make up their mind. So they either didn't know enough about it, or they just were indifferent to it. So
Yeah.
not able to.
I'm tempted a critical reading, which is that employability is a buzzword and reflective practice is a buzzword, and when it actually comes down to it, people don't know what they mean, and so they can't articulate the relationship
Yeah.
because they're just taken for granted, both of them, but they've got no way of connecting them.
Yeah.
Which is again ironic, isn't it? Because one of the kind of issues for employability is finding ways to enable students to articulate their abilities, their capabilities, their attributes, their skills, whatever
Yeah.
terminology you want to use. It's being able to articulate an evidence. And what we found, and dare I say, particularly when we're talking to academics, is that academics often actually couldn't articulate what their disciplines were doing for their students beyond subject knowledge. And okay, they may be neutral there. Neutrality to me was an indicator that they couldn't really articulate.
Yes.
They couldn't really see the connections.
Because I'm sure that a lot of tutors would agree with the fact that their subject curriculum does develop critical thinking and reflective thinking in their students. But if they then can't see that being connected to their employability, then that might be problematic. Yes, that's what we thought.
Having said that, it is a particular ideological position, isn't it, which we have at the moment, which says that employability is connected with critical thinking and reflective practice. Whereas, you could take a perfectly legitimate position and say that people are much less likely to be employable if they are critical. The more critical they are, the less.
Well, again, it is culturally specific, isn't it? And it is also, skill, but skills are not neutral. What is I could. Well, there's a nice little example that's used in one of the papers that it's like I can be aggressive and stroppy, and
Yes, I agree.
and I don't know. Maybe I will get away with it, but I might get away with it less because I'm female than John would because you're male. So again, it's coming back to the context.
You're more aggressive and stroppy than I am.
I know I am. That was a very bad example. Okay, let's look at some of our other overview of our results then. So students overall. This is what students thought. Okay, so students thought that employers valued most a set of generic skills and that individual schools needed tailor-made approaches to employability. Okay, so there's really 2 points in that first bullet, aren't there? The second one is something that the university is already responding to, because it's changed the way that it's changing the direction in which its careers service operates. That first one, employers valued most a set of generic skills. Actually, the research literature doesn't support that. The research literature says that employers think that actually kind of a lot of kind of generic skills can kind of be picked up on the job, and what they want is professionalism, integrity, honesty, trustworthiness, enthusiasm, commitment. So there's a potential mismatch there between what employers say and what students think employers want. We've come across that second point already. Students as a group were open to new and fluid ideas, although they define this instrumentally, focusing on the CV.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Because if you ask them what is employability, then almost unanimously they would think it's something that helps you get the job. It's about your CV, how you make your CV stand out from the crowd. But if you then continue talking with them, then you see those bit fluid ideas about it later on. But initially they would define it very instrumentally.
So you could say that the students we spoke to actually understand the discourse of employability that's in the research literature, but they would struggle to kind of express it, and they would struggle at the moment perhaps to link it to what they actually get out of their degree courses. And they might struggle to do that because the academics who work with them aren't making those links.
Yes. So in their definitions, they were really trying to define it kind of with some very fixed definition type of, sentences, like, it's just to improve your CV or how you can get an interview, etc., etc.
Okay, employers. So we spoke to a small group of employers who had links to the 4 schools in the UK. So this is, again, the overview. Employers highly agreed that what students did within their curriculum was linked to employability. And now that's a problem, isn't it? So whatever you think about this, it's a problem if employers are saying to us, what goes on inside the degree is important for employability, and academics don't see that. That is a problem. And employers agreed that the development of students as reflective and critical thinkers was important, whereas academics were neutral on that.
Yes.
So we seem to have had, perhaps it was a very forward-thinking group of employers that we spoke to. At the same time, employers did very much rate those extracurricular activities. And now, again, this is something that's, again, starting to feature quite a lot in the literature. The idea that actually, a higher education, should it be degree plus extra stuff, president of the student society, captain of the football team, whatever, or should actually there be a way for that higher education evidence, that result that you come out with, to actually incorporate that learning that goes on outside the formal academic curriculum, because it is valued very, very highly by employers. And the most detailed response we had, which was an interview that Lucy did with an employer connected to the School of History, I remember that employer saying, well, okay, yes, what goes on in these degrees is clearly very important, but when we interview students, we're setting them a challenge to provide us with evidence of the way they've had to deal with a challenging situation, the way they've had to solve a problem working in a team. And okay, they can come back at us and say, I did a group project in my second year, but then the employer will say, well, everyone in your year did that, didn't they? What else is there? What else can you show me that you've kind of gone that extra mile, done that extra bit? And that fourth bullet point, employers thought that it was part of a tutor's role to inform students of employability and careers opportunities and training. Obviously that's quite instrumental. That's just tutor's role to give information. That's not saying it's a tutor's role to embed learning for employability within their curriculum. But generally speaking, employers did see that academics had a strong role in that more holistic development of their students.
Just to press that a little, did they think that it was part of every tutor's role, or that there should be a tutor who should do that?
I think they thought it was part of
Yeah,
every tutor's role.
tutor's role. But it was just to inform on opportunities. So it's even to say, okay, are you thinking about it? There is career service centre, so just go there and talk with somebody, not even to guide them. But I think that tutors, mostly they thought that, you know, the question is actually, you know, they would interpret it as, oh, I have to tell them what to do, I have to guide them, I have to teach them, or I have to correct their CVs. So no, thank you.
Staff then. Now this is, I haven't unpicked the difference between academic and administrative staff here, but I think mostly this is from academics. So the staff had the highest degree score for the challenge of switching students' focus from getting a degree to becoming learners. And now the other thing is here, it's a fairly small sample. You know, we've got 74 people overall, and if you say, well, how many academics are there? I don't know, there's perhaps 30 of those 74 are academics, or 25 of them. So it's still very, very small groups. And obviously, to some extent, we're also talking to people who are interested in employability, because they're the people who agreed to talk to us. So obviously, we're aware of all those caveats. But that first point, so you know, staff, generally speaking, highly agreed that it was a challenge to switch the student focus from getting a degree to becoming learners, yet don't feel strongly about students as critical thinkers and reflective practitioners. So again, there's something's not quite joining up there in the way that some of the academics we spoke to were thinking actually about their role, you might say, and what they do. Academic staff either did not have a strong opinion on the connection of academic and employability learning, or were on the agree side. Okay, so to some extent we've covered that with our least controversial statements. But they didn't strongly agree that employability was intimately connected with the academic curriculum. But they did believe that employer engagement was pretty crucial to the development of the Nottingham Advantage Award. And there's Natasha's comment at the bottom there, that you wondered if that signalled that actually academics were quite happy to see the award developing and engaging with employers, because almost that meant they didn't have to. You know, there was another space that was dealing with this particular set of issues about student development.
Yes.
Okay, so there's an overview of some of the themes that we pulled out of the Nottingham-based data. Oh, I'm sorry, this is a bit small. We then did that further group of 23, 24 interviews with colleagues at Ningbo. Now we were doing this at Ningbo just during an exam period, so it was about catching who was prepared to give us the time. But we did manage to get a reasonable group of tutors, central admin staff and students. And we conducted the same interview, and that revealed the same themes that had come out of the UK interviews, but it did reveal a set of additional stuff that was specific to China. So obviously that was of particular interest, considering here we have Nottingham Global University, and one of the big issues for the Nottingham Advantage Award at the moment is how do we support the rollout of these programs in Malaysia and in China, and how do we make sure that obviously they develop in a way that's fit for the local context as well as the global context. So this is actually quite useful for that. So particular focus on the need to perform well in Chinese government metrics. So rates of employment of students post-graduation, absolutely crucial, plastered all over
the Ningbo campus.
It's there. You know, all the data is there on the Ningbo campus website. For every degree, it'll tell you, won't it, that a year after graduation, it'll say that 100% of students are in employment, or it might be a little bit more nuanced than that and say 60% are in postgraduate study and 40% are in employment.
but it'll give you the stats to show you that everyone is gainfully occupied, you know, within a certain period after their graduation. The people in China, both staff and students, talked about Western styles of knowledge. Now, they saw the difference between Asian and Western styles, and they saw that the Western style was crucial. They saw the connection between that and making students employable, because they articulated Western style knowledge as being about debate and discussion and criticality. So that's just what was coming out of those interviews. So that was quite interesting, and obviously not something that we picked up in the UK. The fourth bullet point I found, again, hadn't really struck me, that that there were staff at Ningbo who were working with mobility programs. So students, for instance, who were coming and going between the campuses, or they were working in the foundation year. You know, every student, virtually every student on the Ningbo campus does a core foundation year before they go into their degree. And that's due to the different exit points from their secondary education, isn't it, Christine? So what some people said to us was, well, I don't have to worry about employability because I'm dealing with the foundation year. Employability comes later. Or, well, I'm dealing with the first 2 years of a programme, then my students are going off to the UK campus, employability will be dealt with then. So there was a little bit of, you might say, kind of passing the buck. It can be dealt with at a later point. The mothership can pick that up. So just a little bit of that came out. And obviously they were all, everyone spoke about the need to make sure that the award was fit for purpose in the Chinese context, and that the award should support students in being employable both in China and internationally. And people saw that being employable in China and internationally was not quite the same thing. And there was a need to recognise that a student graduating from Ningbo had to know, dare I say, had to know how to behave when they went for a job interview with a Chinese company, and that behaviour might need to be different than if they went for an interview and were seeking employment with a multinational. So anyway, I suppose the most interesting thing about that was I wasn't anticipating any of this. You know, we took the opportunity to do more interviews on the China campus, and it told us some slightly different things about what people were worrying about. So overall, the people we spoke to on the Ningbo campus saw themselves as being different and in a different context. They didn't see that their issues were the same as the issues that faced the UK campus. And they felt that a global university had to very much also think about localised needs and shouldn't lose sight of those because they were different. Okay, I'm heading towards the end. Okay, so where did this get us? Now, the team working on the award, so that's Vicky Mann, the manager, and her colleague Hayley. There's a steering group with representation around the university. There's myself, there's Natasha and Lucy as the researchers working on this project. When we've had hard discussions about the journey that the award has come on, I think we would generally all agree that the award itself has shifted its philosophical position, and that it has shifted in line with what the research literature tells us. You know, before we started reading all of this literature, the award was already thinking about, you know, sustainability, internationalisation, global citizenship. It was very much trying to move away from a skills focus. It was talking about employability as a journey. It was starting to talk about literacies rather than skills. So the award team had already kind of shifted its direction, and it's quite satisfying to see that a lot of the kind of thinking that we'd already started to kind of embed into the modules does actually fit with some of the strands within the research literature. And obviously there are various theoretical positions that in hindsight you can come back to and say, actually, the award slots into this. And if you look at the discourse of employability, you might say that broadly, as it stands at the moment, it has shifted from a kind of human capital perspective, education as investment to get a good job, to capability, the work of Amartya Sen, to transformative learning, the work of Harvey Siegel and Decker and various other people, the education for democracy, social justice, etc., etc. It is now kind of fitting itself into this kind of quite wonderfully warm paradigm that's out there at the moment. And it is very much thinking in terms of individual modules that are being developed at the moment about interdisciplinarity. How do you use the award as a vehicle to get students working together from different schools and faculties across the campuses internationally as well, wherever possible? And how do you also use the award as a test bed for the design of programs that support students in the development of capabilities that actually ultimately, when and if Nottingham gets itself into a position where it's prepared to do this, would be better off inside a mainstream curriculum than as they currently are at the moment, sitting on the outside edge. Okay, so we've been very much saying to anyone who will kind of listen to us that the Nottingham Advantage Award has moved from being, okay, it's an extracurricular skills programme, to being a test vehicle for some big ideas in a non-threatening, low-risk environment. Other universities have opted for a kind of high-risk strategy than Nottingham. I'll come back to that in just a minute.
Not too many minutes.
No, it's all right. I'm just about there, honest. So if we just think of what we concluded from our research and what we've gone back to the university's Teaching and Learning Board and said to them, we concluded that there was a disconnect between how the award team and actually indeed how the careers service here at Nottingham see employability and how some stakeholders see that. I'm not saying here one view is right and one view is wrong, but I'm saying there are some significant differences in understandings and opinions, and it may be worthwhile trying to bring those closer together. There is tension over the role of the academic curriculum, how it relates to employability. There's tensions over the responsibility for employability, which obviously comes back to your understanding of it, what it is. And where Nottingham is at the moment is we're not quite up to date with the direction of travel that we see with some of our competitors, like Melbourne, like the University of British Columbia, like Hong Kong, actually like Southampton, like Aberdeen. Right? There are various universities out there that have gone down the route of reshaping their curricula and kind of bringing in some of the kind of bigger world issues and looking for interdisciplinarity, looking for employability actually within an academic framework. Nottingham's thinking about it, but it's not there yet. We think that we've unpicked an information asymmetry. I'm stealing a phrase there from our esteemed colleague John Morgan and some of his Chinese colleagues. And that asymmetry is again about the understanding of employability, the differences that exist in that, and different conceptualizations actually of the curriculum. Now, is the curriculum what you do in your degree? Is it your degree stuff? Or is it the learning experience and the learning journey? So again, I think that's something that came out of this particular piece of research. So what we did at the end of our project report to Teaching and Learning Board, we kind of picked out some of the things that we liked from the literature and suggested that new ways of thinking about what's the purpose of a University of Nottingham education? What do we want our students to be? And this was what we came up with. That actually the purpose of the university experience was to enable students to develop as life-wide learners as well as lifelong learners. Life-wide learning, taking in the student experience rather than just narrowly framed 360 credits in the undergraduate degree. That there's a whole series of literacies that include personal literacy, the ability to be critically aware of one's own abilities, strengths and weaknesses, critical and reflective practice, etc., but also preparing students to be members of societies, of communities of practice, whatever forms they may take, and equipping students to be proactive, to be agents of change, which I must admit I prefer to the idea of students as leaders. Okay, so we kind of come up with a different way of thinking. And my very last two slides, and it seems to me that where Nottingham is at the moment, and where this kind of research this research has just added an extra bit of clarity to where Nottingham is at the moment, is that Nottingham there's an awful lot of work going on in this institution that's rethinking curriculum and rethinking various aspects of student experience and quality assurance. So there's been a whole series of initiatives over the last 2 years. But we haven't been quite as bold as some other universities, and at the moment we're kind of on a go slow. Nottingham is, to some extent, is looking to see if individual schools and faculties go down a more kind of holistic approach themselves, rather than kind of any sense that it's going to impose change. I heard Sarah Parkin speak a few weeks ago from Forum for the Future, who's just published a new book, and I just loved the title, The Positive Deviant. I think you could apply that in so many different fields. And something that she said that really struck with me, she, again, talking about the clash of values. So, we know that from next autumn, undergraduate students are paying £9,000 a year fees here in the UK. I don't quite know what the fee structure means for them in China and Malaysia, but I know still it's expensive for their local contexts. They're paying big fees. Does that, in a sense, mean that they're being forced back into a human capital discourse? Because they're having to put so much into that, and there's the knock-on effect of repayment over many years, the need to get those jobs that enable you to earn sufficiently to repay your debts. So to some extent, almost, if I say, is it like an own goal that we're forcing the system into a human capital discourse, whereas the literature suggests that everything has been going more towards a kind of human development and capabilities discourse. So do we actually have to think of ways in which we can be more positively deviant? And, sorry, you can't read that. I only bunged this in this morning. And the other thing, just my very final slide, going back to, is it Reginald or Ronald Barnett? Thank you. He's Learning for an Unknown Future. He has this wonderful kind of little table where he just sets out what is high risk and what's low risk. And in his kind of lower and no risk brackets, in a sense, you have educational development. If you want to go for the higher risk, perhaps you might end up with educational transformation. What we'd like to do with the Nottingham Advantage Award is do the educational transformation bit, because actually we can do it at the moment because we're outside of the curriculum. We're not going to mess up anyone's degree classification. And so it's a nice, safe testing ground, which enables us to be that bit more creative. Thank you. I'll shut up there.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you very much. Extremely inspiring and eloquent. And I'll open it up now for
any questions on me or Natasha?
And challenges and contributions.
Okay, really interesting project, and I think it's thrown up some really fascinating things for where the university might go. Given my narrow-minded personality as a research director, what's the angle the first journal article is going to take?
Actually, the first one, which has already been submitted, has taken the angle of the differences between the differences that we got from China. Okay, so the first paper has actually looked at the results of the Chinese interviews, which aren't all with Chinese people, but the Chinese campus data, and unpicked the differences of emphasis. Right? there's quite a lot of stuff to do with unpicking the Q methodology and how that enables you to get one group of stakeholders to reflect on the views of others. And Natasha and Lucy will take the lead on that as the methodology experts. But the second kind of broad paper that I'm working on at the moment, and I've completely forgotten my angle on the second one is about the tension for academics in what is the purpose of the curriculum. So it's the debate between what does the academic curriculum do. If you're doing engineering, you might say, well, there's a high expectation that you will go into an engineering related profession, and there are professional body requirements, although those professional body requirements actually have very much shifted their own ground in recent years.
And a lot of engineers go into management consultancy and areas like that.
Indeed they do, but there's a much higher proportion of engineering graduates who will go into engineering than history graduates who will become historians. In fact, I think 99.9% of history graduates will not become historians, will they? And so there's a kind of challenge to, again, I suppose what it seemed, my personal view is that again, as a history graduate, is that particularly considering, for instance, the funding climate in the UK, where the arts and humanities are no longer government funded, that to articulate more clearly and explicitly you might say the generic the developmental benefits of a humanities degree actually strengthens the argument for the humanities, but academics aren't seeing that at the moment.
I suppose that links into other things that I suppose is lurking behind why I'm asking, because for me there's a lot of things in here. Obviously in a presentation it's then very difficult to see how much data there is that can talk to that issue. You know, there's stuff about capabilities, there's stuff, it seems to me, about curriculum and the place of these employability skills, the role of university, and it's what I don't have at the moment is a sense of, you know, how much data there is to talk about that in a subject like history meaningfully, and how generalisable that can be.
I think there's probably a reasonable amount, because there's 74 interviews overall, and plus and those interviews, obviously you can break them down, and there's a series of themes that can be unpicked out of them, and they're quite lengthy interviews as well.
And it's also interesting to say, we will say that the university staff and employers that we talked with are the ones who are, as we said, interested in employability. So we will wonder, so what then do the others who are not that interested in employability think, if we still with the ones that we conducted interviews, if we have some kind of sometimes controversial findings? So would it be like really extreme then with the others who are not so, I wouldn't say supportive of employability agenda, because also we did approach employability agenda critically ourselves. So we did not want to position ourselves, we favor this agenda or we don't favor this agenda, but we just wanted to understand what it means and how people actually, what kind of position and perspectives they had on it. So.
I think the thing that worries me, I suppose, about the data is I think there's potentially kind of 6 or 7 papers from this project. I think we've got a list of about 6.
Yes, about 7.
Really. But it's all Nottingham. Okay. Obviously, it articulates with the literature. It can respond to other studies in other institutions.
Yes.
But it's very much Nottingham, UK, Nottingham, Ningbo.
Yeah.
So it's very much a kind of case study.
Yes, case study. So.
But your contrast. Sorry. I'm going to contribute. Paul.
Yes. Well, I just work for the school, and I've been been wondering all the time how this whole project could be very helpful for international students. We teach at City, and obviously many foreign students who come through our department are very much interested in developing all those skills like critical thinking, for example, where we deal currently with postgraduate students, PhDs and master's level students, and I think it's really brilliant.
I think Sealy is incredibly well positioned,
Yes,
isn't it, to make
yes.
a major contribution.
Yes,
And yet in Ningbo, there was a sense that the foundation year, which is very much delivered by Sealy in Ningbo, the small group of people we spoke to was there saying, well, we don't have to worry, it'll be the problem for whoever picks up those students when they do their degree.
Yeah, but that's really very interesting. And at the moment that we are working actually on this new curriculum for C, I think it's crucial to consider all those issues, because students are not longer really coming to do their degree and go back to the job position that is actually waiting for them back home. From the interviews and talking to my tutees, I recognize that many of them actually are interested in the global market and being employed, not necessarily back home. So this is very valid. I actually
They're looking to
speechless.
they need to be adaptable, don't they, and flexible,
Absolutely.
and creative.
Yes, totally. And it's not longer, I think, coming to just do any degree in the UK or any Western country or English-speaking country. I think also that they shop around. They look for good university and good curricula to choose the best subjects and degrees for them. So yeah, very valid. I mean, thank you. Very interesting.
I just want to add to that. I think in Ningbo, for the first year students, I was a bit surprised by the comments by
Well, if you were still there, Chris, it would be different.
because I think Celia is very much involved in this employability program, but Celia is not the only one. Like the student affairs office, in fact, so it's wholly staffed by Chinese central administration staff here, and they have a compulsory program for employability, compulsory in the sense that it's imposed by the Chinese government.
This is
So-
the kind of the Chinese civics.
No, it's separate, completely separate. So it's about CV and those kind of stuff. So they have politics and PE and all that compulsory, but they also have a year one employability program, which is only offered to Chinese nationals. So it's
But you see, the problem there,
Yeah.
well, I don't mean to say that, the potential, one way you could see that as a problem, because it's compartmentalised. It sits there, doesn't it, as this is the CV workshop, this is the employability programme. It sits in a box. Now, the other way, obviously one of the other areas of debate is, should employability or internationalisation or sustainability be integrated, embedded, additional, whatever? Okay, now, you might say that if it's bolt-on and optional, it's no good really, because the students who need it most don't choose it. If it is integrated, then is it integrated in a way that's innovative, creative and explicit, or is it kind of integrated in a kind of hidden way, as was suggested by one of our interviewees, that in a sense I'll do employability but I'm not going to tell the students I'm doing it. Right, so there's a kind of and if it's how you can embed employability and it can help with educational development, but can it help with educational transformation as well? There's making those extra steps to kind of higher level learning, which enables students and staff. You might say the big issue here is potentially isn't students, it's staff, isn't it? It's if the big shifts have to take place in the academics who are actually delivering higher education and what they see as its purpose.
You mean they've got to know what the Nottingham Advantage Award is?
No, they don't have to know what the Advantage Award is. No, helps. Because I mean, ultimately, I mean, a couple of our other people, this again I think was in Ningbo, said that the Nottingham Advantage Award was great, but obviously, ultimately, at the end of the day, the best thing would be not to need it, because the programmes did the job themselves. So ultimately, the greatest success of the Nottingham Advantage Award would be its extinction.
What, how is this going to be evaluated? I mean, what I'm thinking here is universities are driven by metrics. Is this in the university's mind related to the graduate employment metric in any way?
Oh gosh, yes. I mean, the Nottingham Advantage Award is part of the strategy to deliver employability, to ensure that Nottingham stays up there in the metrics. And I quoted something in here that, you know, we're at the moment, was it Nottingham's the
15th,
joint 15th in employer rankings, currently the fourth most targeted institution in the UK by top employers. So the Nottingham Advantage Award helps us to stay up the top in those various metrics. But that's great. But the Nottingham Advantage Award actually is no longer just doing the simple skills stuff. It's doing all the other stuff, and it's recognising that hopefully it's the other stuff that makes students employable rather than the basics.
Sorry.
No, please. I was just thinking about American universities. I happened to graduate from one, and I think it's incredibly vital for universities to actually really address those issues, because it's all very much competitive out there, I think, and actually students do choose particular universities / the subjects and fields of studies, and I think that absolutely confirms the importance of this project. Yeah.
Well, I mean, my other research area is sustainability, and the Higher Education Academy published a report, research report last year, where they surveyed something like 5,600 first-year undergraduates in the UK, and that survey revealed that something like 70% of the students interviewed were willing, for example, to forego a certain percentage of salary or a certain amount of salary in order to opt into a university that was very strong in terms of its sustainability programs. Now, when it got to a certain amount of salary loss, they were no longer willing.
It's like buying organic vegetables.
Yes, but you know, so there is obviously students are hugely important change agents in all of this, and if students have an understanding of the particular needs for this unknown future, then obviously that in its turn at some point will impact upon the curriculum.
Also, from a student perspective, we're doing MSc entrepreneurship.
In the business school?
Yes. We have this project to work with companies that we're assigned to, which is also good because it gives practicality on how to do a business plan in real life. But still, most students are, they finish their undergrads, then they came to postgrad, so they're still fresh graduates and they don't have experience in how to deal with meetings and meeting people, being punctual, how to talk to them and stuff like that. So we have our career services, which is very interesting. We attend most of them, but many students don't. It's optional. So if it's maybe a lot of students are shy in many ways or anything, if it's integrated or it has some degree of compulsory within the modules and programs, it makes it more efficient in a way. In certain levels, not everything could be other advanced optional certain career services, but to a certain degree, I think it should be a bit more disciplined.
Well,
That's very interesting.
it is, isn't it? I mean, most people we talked to said they didn't want anything put inside the curriculum. They wanted, for instance, Nottingham Advantage Award to remain as an optional extra.
Yeah.
It's because it shows up
They
on
really
someone's
didn't want
CV.
to.
You know, it shows that person X has done it, person Y hasn't, so it's good. But you're quite right, aren't you? On the other hand,
Exactly, because the shy
Yeah.
students are the ones who are not proactive. They really lose out.
but it's also the most efficient model, it's the most sustainable model, it's the most forward-thinking model to actually look at what goes on inside the mainstream curriculum.
Is that because those students think it's a positional good?
Yes.
No. And are they right?
That's difficult to say.
Yeah.
Employers want something different, but it
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily have to be the
Yeah.
Nottingham Advantage Award. It can be the football team, can't it? It can be SIF. You know, it can be all the various. There's so many options, aren't there, for students to enrich their experience beyond the degree. The Nottingham Advantage Award is just one of those.
And I wouldn't say this. If or perhaps I will. If every university does this,
Then
will we be
Then
the
have
more
to do more.
competitive nation?
then we'll have to do more, won't we? So we get into this spiral, and you know, filling up students' time, rather than thinking about the quality. Yeah, it needs to be quality rather than quantity.
And anyway, if you read the global auction, it's all hopeless anyway, because China and India are going to outperform us in HE anyway. So.
But just the other thing though about your point about it's better off inside. Of course, the other issue is it's maybe something that's outside is fine for arts and humanities, who have fairly limited contact time on a weekly basis, and perhaps also some of the social sciences. Is not fine for engineering and some of the lab sciences, because that means they don't have the time, so they then get squeezed out. They can't necessarily do the added extra. So there's an equity issue as well.
I think that's fascinating, Sarah, and well, I think it's a fascinating session, but I'm going to draw it to a close at this point. But with the announcement that our next seminar is on the 18th of April, Julio Jimenez will be talking about the role of disciplinary epistemologies in higher education academic writing. And so you'll all be most welcome to come to that. That is at 12:30 lunchtime on the 18th of April. Thank you very much, Sarah.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Very nice to have some people from business school.